Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
and me, Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Welcome to an All Right in Sin City special. On April 22nd, 2022, Literary Arts Windsor and BookFest Festival du Livre Windsor, with funding from the Canadian Heritage, Canadian Arts and Performance Fund, celebrated a new outdoor and, although very cool and rainy, well-attended event at Lanspeary Park in Windsor, BookFest Equinoxe. We welcomed wonderful musicians, but for rights issues, you'll just hear the fabulous poetry and conversation with Alex-Andrei, we know him as Alexei, Ungurenaşu, Windsor's Youth Poet Laureate, and BookFest Festival du Livre Planning Chair during this episode. You'll hear a selection from Kate Hargreaves, Eli Tarek Elbeshani Lynch, Nick Hildenbrand, and Jovan Stefanov, all of whom kindly read and allowed us to record their performance. We begin with an introduction from Alexei.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, my name is Alexei Ungurenaşu. I am Windsor's Youth Poet Laureate, and as you've just heard, also BookFest Festival du Livre Windsor's new planning committee chairperson. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Free Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Now that we are finally experiencing the joy of returning to in-person events, we need to be even more conscious of the land and its people's histories. We live in a country that has been built through colonization, and it continues to thrive on its colonial history. As we enjoy the privilege of occupying different physical spaces once again, please remember that we need to also continue advocating for Indigenous people's rights to their own lands and resources. We still have a long way to go. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, BookFest Festival du Livre Windsor is a 21-year-old local book festival that takes place every year in October. Each year, we welcome dozens of Canadian authors from all genres to read from and talk about their new books. We have panels on anything from fiction and history to poetry and to true crime books. In the past, we have welcomed hundreds of guests over the course of 3 days for each festival. We've done the last 2 years exclusively online, and we are pleased and proud to announce that this year's BookFest Festival du Livre Windsor 2022 will take place in a hybrid format. Over the course of 4 days between October 13 and 16, we will have events both online and in person across different venues in the city each day. For example, you could watch a panel or two online in the morning on Saturday, and then head downtown for another couple of panels in the afternoon and evening. Before we do that, though, we want to welcome everyone back with this outdoors live poetry and music show called Equinoxe. We decided on this name because April marks the 6-month point between last year's and this year's BookFest. I'm so glad to see all of you here this evening and to offer you a breath of fresh air with our talented lineup. We will hear poems from 4 writers as well as music from 2 musicians. There are books on sale from Biblioasis, as well as food vendors and drinks available from Zuleis and Plant Joy as they are setting up. We also want to thank our sponsors, including the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and especially for this event, Heritage Canada's Canadian Arts and Performances Fund. So enjoy the next couple of hours as we mark the return to live in-person events and set the tone for this year's BookFest in October. And first up, we have local poet Kate Hargreaves. Kate is the author of the poetry collection Leak, as well as Jammerstar, a roller derby novel for young readers, as well as Talking Derby, a book of prose vignettes. She holds an MA in English and Creative Writing from the University of Windsor, where she received the Governor General's Gold Medal in Graduate Studies. Her work has appeared in literary journals across Canada, the US, and the UK. As a book designer for numerous Canadian presses, Hargreaves has received honors from the Alcuin Society for Excellence in Book Design, the CBC Bookie Awards, and the Book Publishers Association of Alberta. She grew up in Amherstburg, Ontario, and lives and works in Windsor. Please give it up for Kate Hargreaves.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having me, Literary Arts Windsor, BookFest Windsor, for all the organizers for putting this on. And thank you all for being here in the rain. I know that it's not very pleasant, but I guess that's spring. So it's much appreciated. So I tried to pick some poems that felt like spring. And so I'm going to start with some from my forthcoming book that's coming out with Book Hug called Tend, and then I'm going to read a couple from my prior book with them called Leak. So this one is called I Will Be a Person Who Composts. I will be a person who composts, who buys brown spotted eggs direct from the chickens, who never scoops out the blood spots or tashes shells in the trash. I will wash and sort my recycling. I will bundle cardboard with rough string and gift tie it in neat bows. I will cook fresh soups from scratch. I will wrap my leftovers in beeswax cloth softened against my heart. I'll become a person who sweeps and mops the front porch and waves hello to the neighbors, who appreciates the relationship of bees to apiarist. I will return strange mail to the sender. I will switch from outdoor shoes to slippers. I will become a person who can knit baby socks on tiny needles, who can tame a songbird on an outstretched hand. I will eat crystals. I will work miracles. I will wake up with the sun to be mindful. I will be a person who speaks only in song, who sends handwritten notes to mark minor occasions, who bakes crispy pies and writes in fountain pen. I will scrawl to-do lists onto my palms, collect dryer lint in apron pockets. I will be the kind of person who changes the sheets daily and hangs them to flutter in the cinema of the yard. I will dream with brightness up and saturation down, the one who consumes her receipts, weeds the sidewalk, boils the roots for tea. So this is just a little one called Corvide. No one asks for my thoughts on birds. The ounce-for-ounce ratio of brain mass to body recalls the mirror stage of corvids, unraveling contempt for crows, their feathers in excess, too loud, too dark, too coarse, to gather round shrieking in grief, oil spill, and rumors of eyes lost to beaks. So I guess this is probably the sort of most season-based one. It's not necessarily spring, but it kind of runs through summer and the beginning of fall. And it's in a couple different parts. So this is called Bolt. 1. The lettuce bolted, shot to seed and tipped in the storm. Tomatoes worked through the fence, dropping green fruit, choking out the blueberry bush. What is a weed if it flowers, draws butterflies to the window in orange and black relief? The clover hasn't quite seeded, but I root for the tiny clusters to outgrow hungry spadgers and thrive. Deadwood climbs tall as children and bursts with pink blooms. I nearly uprooted them. Some things just need time. I write the flowers down, learn their leaves and colors and names to call to the bees. 2. Sweet woodruff for humility hewn from its temporary bed. Forget zinnia seeds until they sprout absent friends. What's a weed but a yarrow, time under grub-eaten leaves crawling for blue salvia? I think of you until I don't. Rhododendron grows over dead cedar. Peonies too lush to be bashful plant a full bed of distrust. Lavender for luck. Ivy and invasive fidelity married to the soil. Unassuming dill claims to guard against evil. A folly of columbine, a recovery of poppies. 3. The pumpkin vine rots at its base, but crawls on across pebbles, content to open orange blossoms every morning and close again by noon. Knows it cannot sustain a gourd like the marrows that lengthen all summer into fall. I choose a pumpkin-colored sleeper, the size of a fennec fox today, she says, or some fancy French cake, or a camping lantern. I thumb board books about black cats and pumpkins coo at impossibly small and unnecessary shoes. Buy a new litter box so the cat will stop shitting on the floor. 4. Chopping back the rows of Chiron, tossing buds out of season to bloom in heavy piles, to dry and shrink. I sweat early fall, hacking telltale roses with Stevie Nicks on repeat. I don't have the triceps or the snips for the thick branches that snap rainwater across my face and shelter thorns with fairy tale intentions. So I'm just going to read one more from this manuscript, and then I'm going to read a couple from Leek. So this one is, again, kind of a good rainy poem because it's about some time spent in England when I was a child. This is called Root. Some people only take root near water, tugged toward walkable riversides that mark north or west or uptown or home. Landlock rises in throats and draws pulses faster. Fields and flats close like walls and traps, but currents crack back doors. The lurch of cars uncoupling, fog muffling horns softens my jaw and loosens cramps, the heavy comfort of train yards through rain and open windows. A railway garden over a crumbling wall where elderflower wine takes root. Red foxes quick step past bedroom windows, pausing to peek in at suitcases, dolls, damp washing steaming on rads. The trains back home crawl, but the ones here move like ghosts. Don't rattle the plants on the windowsill. Did we really play on that wall hoisted into the railway garden to pause time and rescue snails? She teaches the alchemy of nettle stings, prickling across ankles to soothe with dock leaves. We don't have this magic back home. Stinging nettle drives out curses, brews tea against weakness. I collect its sharp leaves in my side, permanent ties to the trains, the wall, a lifelong debt of hives. So I'm going to read a couple from Leek, which came out back in 2014. Also with Book Hug. And each of the sections start with a poem that kind of plays with the same word and turns it on its head a little bit. So this one's called Heap. She heaps. She heaps dirty clothes and dish rags on the stairs. She heaps her plate with Brussels sprouts. She heaps her teaspoon with brown sugar, stirs it into oats. She heaps the compost. She composts heaps. She mounds, she piles old newspaper on the bedroom floor. She plies with wood, she pulls wool over thighs. She plies, she please, she only buys 2-ply. Her nose runs in her sleep, she rubs the sleep from her eyes. She thighs in her sleep, hives cover her thighs, she smears calamine on her skin. Washes ink from her hair, she lather, rinse, repeats, she dries. Piles towels in the tub, heaps dress and tights in the sink. She scrapes her leg, scratches, loses sleep. Heaps blankets on the floor, hives warm, nails out, she seeps. And I'll just read one last one from here, which I always like to end on, not because it has anything to do with spring, but because it made my publisher nauseous, which I think is always a good thing in a poem. So this is called Recipe. Last night an abscess, red and furious, seeping through the top of my sock. Damp gray cotton clinging to taut skin. In the kitchen, I pour boiling water over a fork, expose and puncture, dig prongs deep into the raw mound, and the smell, not like the cat's sore when it bursts, sour cheese, acrid and retching, but spicy jalapeno, coriander, garlic. I press with both thumbs, my foot issues a kidney bean, clumps of ground beef, tomato juice, hot chili drips between my toes, bits of onion slide over tendons, slip into the carpet as I hop, holding the leaky foot level, hop to the cupboard for a plate and the fridge for a slice of bread to sop up my mess. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. You are a master at writing about the body and our uncertain relationships with our bodies. And you also have a new collection of poems coming out this fall called Tend. Where does Tend stand in relation to your other poetry book, Leak, which came out a few years ago, in terms of their representations of bodies and bodily relations?
Yeah, so I think that with Tend, I didn't necessarily go into it thinking that I was going to write about bodies, but inevitably, as you can tell there and in some of the other poems, you'll be able to tell it's sort of hard to get away from. Not only am I sort of deeply fascinated by trying to articulate the challenge of articulating bodily sensations and how, we kind of all exist embodied all the time, but I think that partway through the writing process, I was sort of forced into writing more about the body because I actually had a really traumatic injury partway through writing the book. So it kind of took a major turn, and that kind of shows up in the text and the way it's organized as well. So I broke my leg halfway through writing the book. And when your leg is screaming at you and you're writing poems, then the embodiment becomes so much more forefronted. But I think also even going back to before that, I look at the poems I wrote before that happened, and I think, God, I thought I wasn't writing about the body, but I totally was, because there's belly button lint, and there's like the discomfort of exercise, and there's an embedded IUD in the wall of a uterus, and there's all sorts of bodily things in there. I think that the challenge really, it's sort of thinking about how to write words around things that are so sensory. Even when I broke my leg, I got asked, how do you rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? And sort of, how do you even do that on a numerical scale when it's maybe it'd be not easier in that moment to do it in a poem, but maybe in the aftermath. And I think with Tend, I think there is a bit of a difference in that there's a little bit of more vulnerability. I like to joke that Leak kind of hides a little bit behind puns and gore. I don't think that I was as comfortable sort of addressing sort of more vulnerable emotional content. And I think maybe part of the effect of the isolation and the quarantine of the pandemic is that you kind of have to kind of get into that deep work with yourself at the same time as doing the embodied work. So I think, it's a little bit more, a little bit softer. It tries to tend to those broken pieces, I think. And I like, when I was thinking about what to call it, I thought, tending to a garden, tending to what's broken, but also just the word tender. And I think it is a little bit softer. But it still has puns and gore for anybody who liked the puns and gore. So
Great, thank you. And that's so interesting how, the injury changed maybe both the poems you wrote after and also your perspective on the poems you already wrote.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the way that, looking back on the earlier poems, I didn't think that they would all fit together, and inevitably they did, because I just can't get out of that obsession with poems that try to kind of make you feel like they've got you by the guts. So
Great, thank you so much, everyone. Kate Hargreaves.
Thank you so much.
And I would now like to introduce a special guest. Eli Tarek El-Beshalaneh Lynch is a writer living in Montreal. Their work has appeared in the Best Canadian Poetry 2018 Anthology, The New Quarterly, ARC Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. They were longlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize in 2019. Their book, Not Body, from 2020, was published by Metatron Press and was shortlisted for the QWF Concordia First Book Award. And their second book, The Good Arabs, was published by Metonymy Press in September 2021. They are an editor at Smoke and Mold and a nonfiction editor at The Puritan. Everyone, please welcome Eli to Windsor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eli. Thank you so much for coming out. It's really nice to see people under umbrellas for readings, even though it's raining. So I'm going to be reading from my second book of poetry called The Good Arabs. My first book was called Not Body. And I'm just going to start off with the first poem in the book called Lanspeary Made Me Gay. Ya salam, ya salam, قد إيه حلو الغرام. يا سلام يا سلام، قد إيه حلو الغرام. Could be a woman, could be a man, could be someone floating in between or somewhere else, someone in a different country, on a different plane, a different part of Earth's tectonic plates, a space right in between two of them, two men sharing a bed, but no one knows, a shattering. Earthquakes so normal, we all know the drill. Know to keep the good plate strapped in. Know that sometimes you wake up to shaking, you wake up to floating. Those minutes in between sleep and the shake, endless, until they're not. You're up and out of the apartment. Your pants still hang between your legs. Pull them up, running down the stairs, hoping no one sees, but someone always does. Could be a woman, could be a man. You never know with this language. Never know when Arabic holds an inherent femininity between her lips, between the short eyes and the breathy ahs. Men's mouths filled with feminized verbs, thrown around like hot pita. The air between the bread swelling held at the end of fingertips, hot, crisp, and swollen. Cousins, aunts, uncles yelling one end of this long table to the other. Voices mingling in one loud white noise, passing plates back and forth, throwing balls of hot pita, bottles of bira. Before gender still sunken deep into her language, into hugs, kisses between men, the woman's hand resting on another woman's cheek, leaning deeply, looking gently, the moon's wink haunting vast desert nights, the glimmer of the sand sparkling in the light cast, nomadic peoples moving, tectonic plates jerking. I release my femininity in Arabic, move with a body unseen in English. Like every time Lanspeary comes on, I get up, wriggle my hips, and summon my preteen body, writhing to the sounds of the oud. My eyes closing as Nancy's voice guides me into the crowd of my family. Pulling my cousins into dance, raising my arms, twisting my hips, and emulating Nancy belly dancing in her music video. A shake of the hip for every achas mak hand twist hip shake a see back left. The wind is making everything sound really like kind of ominous, but also very cool. So it's adding something to the poems, I think. So the next poem is called Ma Salama. With age, we become more intimate, something that makes us both sweat. If only we could speak more plainly. Instead, we sweat and we sweat. The past becomes the present when we speak it into existence. My khalo tells me about the time he first came to Canada, sweaty in the way I inherit, nervous in the way I also inherit. He took a boat and then a plane dripping with sweat. Sitting beside an Egyptian man, mouth hard with G. My chalo is kind but distracted, though the conversation gives him some lightness, a little bit of sweetness lingering in the man's mouth after they share chocolate. He looks my uncle up and down, and chalo takes a gulp, his body vibrating with a new kind of nervous sweat. At the security checkpoint, his armpit stains so wet that T-shirt looks 3 times as dark. Through his gray T-shirt, he sweats and he sweats. Staring at the tall back in front of him, he joins one of the lines, praying, Allah yisa'adne. When he looks up finally, he sees a familiar face smiling at him, drying the sweat. Ahlan, says the Egyptian man, and my chalo passes him his passport. Barely looking at it, the man passes it back, my chalo replying with the hurried sweets of shukrans with the most thanks he's ever felt. Ma'asalama, waves the man. Ma'asalama, says my uncle, his passport and palms dripping with sweat. I kind of feel like I brought the bad weather with me. Montreal was like really rainy, and then when I left this morning, it was very sunny. And then I got here and it was very rainy, so sorry about that. The next poem is called This Is Not a Poem. In this new poem, there are no words. You might think that there are words in this poem because you are reading the words you think you see, but I promise you, there are no words at all. No phrases, not one sentence. There isn't an image of forgetting. Grab your wallet when you leave the house. Or when you feel absurd for trying to tell your mother that you are poly, she says, does your partner know? Imagine you cheating on your partner and then telling your mother casually. Inspecting your fingernails for dirt. Gorging on the everything of your desires. So maybe this is not a poem after all, not the confessional you might have expected. The fat around the pork makes its way through the small spaces between your teeth as you continue to suck and chew. It is tasty. It is not a poem, but an indulgence you are working on, turning the pork into small enough pieces so that it can make its way successfully through you, to be made into shit and get on its way out. But the fattiness of the pork is your most basic pleasure in this mouth. So you don't open your mouth or say any words like this poem, not poem. Your mouth is not a poetic installation, but the chewing is decadence. You have always been a slow eater, and you sit at the table as your parents become impatient, your sister leaving the table first, then your mother, then, with a sigh, your father. Do not leave before you finish everything on your plate. But you don't want the broccoli, only the fat of the pork, and you are stubborn, and so you sit, moving around, not in a poem, but at a table in the kitchen, and pick at the broccoli and chew slowly, slowly, until he says, get up and brush your teeth and go to bed. In poems, there's often this moment of reveal, but in this, nothing is revealed, not a poem, nor a moment of sinking into your chair. Those moments are left out with the shit and the pork, unlike the ones filled with fat and leaking over the edge. You say, not this time, and hold it all in, until overfilled you push it all out. And when she asks you why you always have stomach aches, you shrug and answer her, this is not a poem. All right, I'm just going to read one more last poem, which is called The Cycle. 1. These days, I see capitalism written plainly in every poem, though the poetry masters say show, don't tell. But if we were to show this indiscernible void, the make-believe of pieces of paper, not coin, that make the world go not round, but into the hands of the few, would this change how you see this intoxication with power? 2. He looks up from his food, a hamburger between 2 slices of bread, and asks as though this were the most important question, will Teta have enough chobos to eat back home? 3. Article 534 of the Lebanese Penal Code prohibits having sexual relations that are contradicting the laws of nature, which is punishable by up to a year in prison. As a practical matter, enforcement of the law has been varied and often occurs through occasional police arrests. This is to say, this law was put in place by the French government in the early 1900s. They say a relic. I say a shift in the century, a matter of public privacy. She says I bashum, which means we have absorbed their respectability. 4. These days I see more people looking for work. It is unavailable. Those of us in the service industry must risk our lives or risk our lives. There's never really a choice. One way or another, they will ultimately claim us. Who are they? We don't even know. The facelessness makes them undetectable. 5. I marvel at the care I find in my neighbors, in my friends, in the people on the internet tweeting dark jokes that sustain me through another day. This weakness in us, in you, in me, is not a weakness, but a sickness, not always of our own making. We try our best to help each other, but they do not let us. Tents are destroyed. Shelters must be sober. The snow falls for the first time, and though the street glimmers white, it is not a good omen. 6. One day there is money, the next there is not. The value plummets, though the pieces of paper still look the same, the lira sitting in my old wallet hidden away. 7. The riots begin, a consequence of so much death. It only makes sense. We debate whether this is the right recourse or not. This is not up for debate. What is the difference between objects and people? When we turn certain people into objects, we become monsters. Ugliness seen not in the way we look, but in our hearts, drying up yellow quickly. Redirect our attention. 8. The death of one political man means nothing. I would say woman or person, but it is almost always a man. They replace one man with another, and it is always the same. This time it is in our faces, escalated. Some of us adapt. The men are starving, but not for food. This unsatiable hunger leaves us wanting for more. 9. But what is a homosexual who is not a homosexual outdoors, not indoors, not in private? But what is an Arab who is not a homosexual, who is not an Arab, who is not a homosexual? Read. You may only transition if you have the surgery. That is to say, you must become one of us. 10. Read. A year in prison. Read. The police are called. Read. The bars are raided. Read. Acts contradicting the laws of nature. Read. At the hands of the police. Read. And the military. Read. I will not describe to you what violations occur, what a prison looks like, if only to stop the violence from reoccurring on the page. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eli. That was wonderful and powerful. And I want to ask you a question as well. In one of the conversations from the Good Arabs, one of the speakers asks, so you don't know the answers, then why write a book? To which the other replies, I am searching. And in another poem, a speaker says, sometimes the truth is poetic. Sometimes you just have to say it. I really love that because whenever we search for truth, especially in terms of identity, we never really stop. Not at the end of a poem, nor at the end of the book. So what I'd like to ask you, Eli, is where has writing this collection led you in your search? And where do you think you might go from here in your writing?
Yeah, I really like that question. Thank you. I think for me, writing is always searching. I think, some people start with writing as like a practice of like journaling where they're like kind of putting their feelings in a book and like searching for what's going on for them. And I never journaled, but I started writing poems as a teenager and writing stories. And I think that was always a way for me to search and figure out what was going on. And so I think for me, the most interesting writing is the one that is searching or the one that is thinking through ideas rather than the one that is trying to give us answers. And so I don't want to be writing poems that are like, here's the way it is and you should listen to me, because I don't think anyone finds that compelling. No one wants to be told what to do or what to think. I think what I'm trying to do with my poems is trying to get people to think in a different way, or to think at least in the way that I do, and like to consider that perspective, or to start questioning different things. And I think that's the kind of work that I find the most compelling, the one that asks me questions and gets me to think in a different way. So I kind of wanted to do that in my work, instead of being like, this is what it is and my opinion is the best, you know, and to kind of try to search. So I think in writing in the future, I don't think I'm ever going to come to a place where I want to write the answer. I think I'm going to continue to try to search and to try to figure out things through my writing.
Thank you, and that's why I think your writing is so contemporary, because we've had so many people in the past write trying to say this is the way it is, and I think part of our generation's like new voices is to just ask more than try to tell. So thank you, I really appreciate you being here. Everyone, one more time for Eli.
Thank you.
Thank you. Meanwhile, our next poet is Nick Hildenbrand, who is a poet and musician from LaSalle, and a recent graduate from the University of Windsor with an MA in English Language and Literature. Regarding art, his interest is in the organic quality of individual intuitive perceptions and expressions, and how they reveal immediate, personal, and encompassing realities. He has just published his first collection of poetry, The Marshwood Songs, with Jovan Stefanov, who will also read next. So everyone, please give it up for Nick Hildenbrand.
Hello, I'm Nick Hildenbrand. I just released a collection called The Marshwood Songs with my poet anime rival, Jovan Stefanov. I'm going to read a few. All right, this first poem is called Elegy on Hopper Woods. It's an attempt to capture these moments which were formative and fleeting regarding the landscape on which I was born. It was written the day before my 25th birthday. My crumble leaf boot got stuck at the foot of your minaret, hounded by the aviary calling of my own name, crying in the pond, art fart plodding and longing for a seat, pinching rivulets and wood striae, frond whistles and scrapes of whitened lilac pipe cane. Fisher bird, your intonation climbs now. I am rooted. I think of your bead and pedaled dreamcatcher composition, Little Coast anthem, walking on it, the refrain of jostled reeds, old timbre shell instrumentation, wind harp tide rack island, glorious remnants of large things, the footsteps of another who saw me and turned around. Lawless crescent in the water touchable. I spit my cigarette filter at it. I remember where you said to me April 17th of this year, the sunburnt planks of some forgotten tree fort, an old manhole bearing faded leopard titles. I remember the hickory spindrift tombstone in the forest about 5 feet above the Ossian anther sprouts in the dirt also growing. The UB in our hearts nettled and capsized I never saw before. This next poem is called Petite Coat. It is about the relationship between the poem as accident and the poet as transcriber. It's a place where me and my friends used to go and smoke and listen to music and watch the stars. And it involves a traversal of time, a conflation of time, past, present, and future. It's exploring the concept of synchronicity. All right. Hasty old fox, what do you remember? I noticed your crossing sunspread lope, your drooping tail of bedclothes in the driveway, Your blue lumen simmer of winded ditch reed and lace, your lookout correcting my glasses and patting my neck with what is it? Your paths, the greenery of your black thumbprint and loom. On the perch, birdwing in the rain dust, stumbling back to my car, a woodwalk scavenger in the motley, tinkering with panels and broke fly leaves, digging at grass seeds in the muck with my dad's notebook in the nighttime bulrush. I followed your northward tracks to the riverside, to the recollection of a cottage, to a sailboat, to your overflowing mouth with dandelion and a tree root, flower cup and black trumpet, coffee-laden, pitch-eyed, to bowstring hair and the diary of Cannon in a paper bag, to a translation of childhood visionary expeditions in the half-light forest, old meander, I encountered you watching me there in the eventide stream. All right, this next poem is part of a series of trespass poems, which I wrote between 2020 and 2021. They involve an exertion of will as a form of rebellion against the roots that have been designated by authority. Basically, I want to be an animal again, man. All right? The name of that copse whose mallet I took, whose knot valleyed my knuckle with slight umber peaks, whose wand antenna cinnamon stick dits and daws revealed me in dabbled patchflake tumults. Sea spray and jangle thumping, honey gold I don't knows, an accord with your looks, an accord while watching the watercolor blushes of your surus, an accord wasted in burning in love for scatter blue light, reciting declarant songs to UFOs or other autonomous suns, lying in the attentive vein of ringleted grass, and on your hip while history's fiddled with that wiring of my instrument a little. That signature of my eternal gait, traipsing in lawns and trudging in farm fields, charting the tread of muddled deer, and that man Adam just arriving baked, with carbide headlamps showing gardens and attic corners, with weird open-souled refractions and carpentry etchings of old Westtown encampments. Various masts punctured by woodpeckers, albatrosses, nocturnal bullfrog croonings by the creek. Our cacophonous emergent selves we still held until the sun rose, chasing your illumined linseed effigy, our illumined trireme in the tree. All right. This poem is essentially a love poem. It's an attempt to document a plethora of synchronicity. It's about pain and love, life and death as part of an existential rhythm. And it involves liberty as an acceptance of these dichotomies. All right, this one's called What's Poppin' at Texas Road. I stumbled into quiescent speckle, into mahogany brick lamppost, All Saints' Day recurrence. I stumbled into third vision Obod, passing over Victory, lurching over Dougal, returning over Gary, into fresh boot scrape heel and Orphic mania, becoming conjunctive utterance reeling with the spirit of it, with the crossroad traversal, with the Milky Way wheel that domed my roundabout rig with cadences of softer fluorescence. As I trampled circles in slippers and feigned stepping into the graveyard, stopping instead at the blackened pitch threshold, head cocked to the wild croon of hounds baying in the woodlot, while I wrapped you in parsimony and chrysanthemum, and the issuing ramble of candle wax diffusing typewriters and crumpled burnt leaf paisley, as you expounded my cosmological feats to all those that wanted you. And in the dollar store ring, finding ancient particles revolving like lost gossamer on the bookshelf. And in my thrifted coat you donned as an oversized cape, hugging to me with hands that made the equilateral protuberance of blackened wingtips, or toppled angels, limping along in the cold wind like that liminal doe who's been following. On the incline rift of broken bed frame, you curled as the crescent moon, clutching my hand beneath your pit, with fingers pressed to the indelible pulse of your rising and falling. And that's it.
Thank you, Nick. Nick, you're a drummer and musician yourself, and your poetry reflects this in its patterns. Can you tell us a bit more about how you represent drumming and your connections to music in your book?
Poetry has always been an aspiration to music since antiquity. And the reason for this is the universality of music as a form of language that translates sentiment with pure immediacy. So my experience as a musician has allowed me to intuit these types of sentiments and intuit lines and the cadence and rhythms of lines in order to bring out that kind of universal language.
Awesome, thank you. And it's so good to have both musicians and poets here and to see those connections between them. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah, Nick Hildenbrand. And up next, we have the other author of the Marshwood Songs, Jovan Stefanov, who is a Macedonian-Canadian poet from Windsor, Ontario. He is currently an English literature graduate student at the University of Windsor and is pursuing a thesis on Elizabethan occultism. And as I said, he published his first collection of poetry with Nick Hildenbrand, the Marshwood Songs. Here's Jovan.
Hey guys, how you doing? This first poem I'm going to read actually takes place down the street. It's called A Sketch for a Poem on St. Alphonsus. Wrote a couple years ago, 2019. I think I was just walking around and I had an idea of a poetry built out of the factory line and the OV pints and a lot of the stuff that kind of makes Windsor Windsor. The onion domes of Tecumseh, Drouillard, Seminole, and Howard, incense and filter chime wheel bearings, the muttering Buick graves overground on Ottawa Street, a Chevy block revs, readying pages for a new Homer, railing asunder the always new, the iron cast made lithium, glass torn brick, the city's acid bowl waste oil Sundance, baby daddy part-time on the line. She's birthing conifers, infant hands calloused ready to sort parts and drill the rendered forested fate of the Ville. Longhouses that grow cleave from river mansions, filled with Crayola runic bark carvings of a new glagolitic, made from the roar of F-150 inscriptions. Yeah, following this, I wrote a poem a couple weeks ago actually now. It's the most recent one I wrote, and it's called Stare Protea, and it was a couple of reactions I had to old botanical catalog, and sort of my attitudes going forward with poetry. Stare Protea. Your terminal face lusters with gratitude nectar, Halifax scrawl in a Victorian newsprint, telling me about new Shennongs of Guangdong, but who drew you? Anon 1874, pen-bottled, anatomical purity. You inked and printed a flower, but no one has felt your press marks for a century. It's 4 a.m. now, and I stare at you from a screen, snow-step, garden-lined, barking at the sunrise, problematic, dog-like, marking up the roof tarp, gold-howled, alive. No more poetry of desktops, no more inching monstrous fathoms and footnotes, and dissipating into the line gap all those thoughts on thighs on quirked-up shorties, or pillaging heaths for hearse poetry. I dance poetry, ziz and trance Ibiza, phono-aesthetic ramble, stowaway, yaboo, silver the asphalt with rail tracks, the Windsorite, the ugly little ass teat, the kettlebell, the swing, the body, the nymph meander nocturnal light, train window telegraph lines, vault fences and fields, rail line pale engines, tumbling like fishing boats over iron cruciform tablets. For Orpheus, the whole world should smell like copper, Press your head against the rail tracks. Levy the water. Hear Nick rejoice and... This is kind of a Hail Mary pass on Marshwood songs. It's kind of the last poem we got in there when Marty gave us a chance to edit the manuscript a couple months ago. It's called a physiognomy poem. And physiognomy is sort of reading one's face symbolically. And I noticed in the city itself, I started to look at maps of it and see faces of my friends and others and myself. So, without further ado, heckled microwave donair. I'm west side spilling Lucy's from my change. I saw the city curdle, bus-wide scrambling praise. My mouth selling goose fat, animal sick, full of it. A common thief for liver, apples, onions, organ vitals. A self-checkout bandit peeling stickers like domed sliver paint. I'm a fiend with a beard treaded by calipers for measurement, over soft glance calibrated for the shit gray grace of streets like San Francisco. I ensalm a few meter lines under the concrete girdle of broadleaf plantain overpour. Hear ye, there lay some unknown saints whose basil dove ears sent away the earth hollow in slow Orphic digs to a beloved and emanating center, to a ladder of divine ascent that underneath and upwards peers the nose full moon over Meadowbrook Lane, where the stars capitulate to a heavenly inside, and every friend in this immortal canal wheels along with me. And for my last poem, I have another one that partially takes place on Ottawa Street, references Juniper Books. It's called America, and I wrote it looking at the Detroit River. Maybe Brazil, where Confederado antebellums never withered. From the thrill of Yankee feet and dribble, America is still America to the slave bone steeple. Burrowing the Strait of Meridian, America is the same as any wild place. Detroit and Rio could share a shore, salt streets in the dark heart of jungle, banana leaves like stars strung on favela floors, and lust, moon-eyed blind to the night, calico cats suckling bones, that watch the dwell of shipbeds dock to tap antennas for gold. Ass-loud polyester and beach-round curves, and eyes snatch rambling over envious hills, timorous rays, balmy flutter, sun-sunk and seeking scarlet O'Haras in 19 Earth's alleyways, while glimpses of home shadow and bantering westward, distracted, impulsive, the catch eyes whistle in the clasp of entrance, drunk and teeming with fingers like aphids on wheat stalk. Let me wine stain your rose cheeks with delusion peaking stubble, half panting and clutching my belt down the winding peaks of El Dorado, laughing, not falling, in a question of stumble. Is America Lafayette Road, fermenting tombs, Livrera Americana, John King and Juniper, where my mouth filled with Newports mimes ancient princely fonts, and pacing the shelves in steel-toe waltz, hallows the halted songs of Huey Long, boisterous and dough-flinging, brown-sugared buckshot, a Guyana seeking gold, po' boys, feotas, coney dogs, the value meal golden arches and hunger's graven hold, city suns, parking lot padres, persisting song above the soil, enormous lights, height of heights, unfolding majesty, despite.
All right, thank you, Jovan. And I know that you write from your experience as a Macedonian Canadian in your poems, which I love to see as a Romanian Canadian myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so how has your heritage influenced your writing in this collection? And is there anything specific related to Macedonian history and culture that you would like to write about in the future?
Yeah, it's been the premise for a lot of the poems. I'd say I didn't read any of them right now, but I'd like to write more as I read more Macedonian. I'd like to take that on for myself later down, maybe 15, 20 years down the line. I'll write in Macedonia. We'll see. But I'm a diaspora poet. But quite frankly, like I think the content is more important than the identity first and foremost. So I'd like to keep focusing on just making rhythmic works constant. Write some more.
Yeah, and living here compared to visiting or living in Macedonia leads you to creating different poems.
Yeah, no,
and content,
100%.
so.
Yeah, no, I'm a Windsor man's through and through. Yeah, we write Windsor poetry, and that's why we're here, I think.
Yeah, we are. All right, thank you so much, Jovan.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.